Tonight, the coastal catastrophe, Hurricane Ian, leaving mass devastation in its wake. The storm pounding the Gulf Coast of Florida after making landfall as a Cat 4. Homes ripped off their foundations, neighborhoods destroyed. An entire island completely cut off after a causeway was wiped out. Dangerous search and rescue efforts now underway. More than 500 people already saved, with many more, though, still trapped. Nursing home residents evacuated on stretchers. More than 2.5 million still without power. Several fatalities confirmed, with fears that number could rise. And late today, Ian gaining momentum, re-strengthening into a Cat 1 hurricane. The system now barreling towards the East Coast for another direct hit. 39 million already under tropical alerts. We'll bring you the latest track in just moments. Also tonight, damage control. The puzzling moment, President Biden appeared to call out for a congresswoman who has been dead for nearly 2 months. The gaffe, the latest in a string of verbal missteps. Why efforts from the White House to explain the incident have only created an even bigger controversy. Carving into Ukraine, Putin's plot to annex 4 new territories barreling full steam ahead. The move coming amid widespread backlash to Russia's latest draft and crippling defeats on the battlefield. The outrage from inside Ukraine and across the globe tonight. Plus, back here at home, the urgent manhunt in Philadelphia after a deadly shootout. New video showing the moment gunshots rang out after a high school football game. The new reward just offered by police. And good evening. As we come on the air tonight, we are tracking Hurricane Ian again, re-strengthening into a Category 1 storm. The system just a fraction of what it was when it slammed into Florida's Gulf Coast, but still packing a very dangerous punch. You can see the live radar right here. Areas like Savannah, Charleston, Myrtle Beach, all being warned tonight. And the damage so far is catastrophic in Florida. Let's take a look at some of the numbers. 2.6 million customers right now without power across Florida. More than 500 rescued from their homes. 5,000 National Guard troops activated, and more than $4 billion in damage. $40 billion, I should say, in damage is expected. We want to show you some of the damage right here. We start in Bonita Springs. Look at this. Homes ripped off roof. These are the stunning images that are coming in tonight. And then here in Sanibel, take a look at these. Boats tossed around like toys. The causeway wiped away completely. And finally, in Sarasota, this is so horrific. Home after home completely destroyed. And we are getting a better look at just how strong that eye wall was when it made landfall near Charlotte County, getting battered with winds of up to 150 miles an hour. And the treacherous storm surge responsible for much of the damage we've seen. This time lapse, take a look, watch that water, showing just how quickly the waters came rushing in to Fort Myers. We mentioned those 500 rescues. This right here was just one of them. A group of volunteers pulling this man from this car and bringing him safety into Collier County. The East Coast from Georgia up through North and South Carolina now bracing for Ian's impact. We will have the full forecast in just moments, but we want to begin with the devastation down in Florida. And NBC Nightly News anchor Lester Holt, who leads us off tonight.
Tonight, our first look at Ian's astonishing trail of destruction. Entire neighborhoods flattened, homes still smoldering, people's possessions and livelihoods strewn across the beach.
Our community has been, in some respects, decimated.
This is what's left on Sanibel Island. Shredded buildings, ripped off foundations. The causeway partially washed away by Ian's winds and a wall of water. The island of 6,000 people now cut off.
It got hit with really biblical storm surge, and it washed away roads, it washed away structures that were not new and could withstand that.
Now the urgent search and rescue efforts to reach those still in danger. Officials evacuating nursing home residents in Orlando on stretchers.
Are you guys okay?
In Naples, first responders helping this woman wade through chest-deep water. This elderly man rescued from his car. Others could only be reached by boat, including Juanazera Thomas.
We came out. As soon as we opened the door, all the water just rushed in the house.
Water so high, Florida's governor calling it a 500-year flooding event. There are countless neighborhoods across the region that look just like this, flooded everywhere. The only way to get anywhere is to walk through the water.
Everything is gone, basically.
I met 14-year-old Juan Garcia near Fort Myers Beach. He was hunkering down at home when the storm struck.
Next thing you know, the water's in the house, and it's rising and rising, and it won't stop. So all of us, we grabbed like our stuff that we needed, like our phones and stuff, and all of us climbed all the way up there.
They spent 3 hours on their roof, whipped by cold rain and fierce winds. I see all the blankets and clothing up there. How many of you were up there?
At least like 11 or 10.
His dad says they were just trying to survive. That is so frightening. So it was raining, you had water coming here, and the wind.
Yeah, but no choice. I don't want to dead inside my house.
Then I met another survivor, fisherman and Coast Guard veteran Matthew Simonson.
You see all your life go.
That's where his boat ended up after Ian tore through. Matthew rode out the storm on a larger boat. For someone who's never seen a storm surge, what is it like?
It's like a tsunami. It's like just a slow-moving tsunami, because it was rushing in here like a raging river. I couldn't believe it.
And he says he couldn't believe where he ended up next.
We were actually eye level. We were taking out some of these top wires, not the top of the
You were
bottom.
eye level to these wires?
Oh yeah, we're that high.
Riding the surge?
Yes.
Goodness gracious. Tonight, President Biden saying there are early reports of a substantial loss of life.
This could be the deadliest hurricane in Florida's history.
As new video is revealing even more of Ian's fury as it came ashore. Trees crashing into homes, floodwaters sweeping away people's belongings, powerful winds bringing down traffic lights and signs. This was a NOAA hurricane hunter's flight headed into the eye of the storm. One of the scientists on board calling it the roughest ride he's ever felt. Tonight, states of emergency declared in multiple other states where Ian is believed to be headed next. While in Florida, officials say some 250,000 people may be displaced and millions remain without power.
We're committed to restoring the infrastructure as needed. That is not going to be an overnight task. That is going to be something that is going to require a lot of love and care.
And Lester Holt joins us now live from Fort Myers Beach tonight. Lester, I want to ask you, you spoke to so many people who rode out this massive hurricane. I'm sure there's a lot of other people that want to go back, but as I was watching your video, I was thinking it's still so dangerous where you are.
Very dangerous. There's still power lines. We assume they're no longer energized, but all manner of debris, especially in areas like this that suffered extreme damage. But many of these people did not get out. In some cases, perhaps because they couldn't get out, had no place to go, but they face that same issue now. Where do I go? These homes now are soaked. They talked about water being up roughly this high, so they're essentially uninhabitable.
Every storm is different. I know you've covered a lot of hurricanes. What stands out about this one?
I think it's the storm surge. We hear that in every hurricane, storm surge. But to really appreciate it, you have to look at what occurred around me. This business behind me was not destroyed by wind. It was destroyed by a boat. Boats that came out of the water here. They were on top of this surge, so many, many feet, and essentially carried the boats to the other side of the street. And they go up and down this area for quite some distance. So I think that's the thing that has stood out to me.
All right, Lester Holt leading us off tonight here on Top Story. Lester, we do appreciate it. As we saw there in Lester's story, there have been hundreds of water rescues in some of the hardest hit areas. NBC's Carrie Sanders has the stories of heroes and the survivors.
From the air, the devastation in Lee County comes into focus, while on the ground, first responders desperately trying to reach those in distress. At the height of the storm, some first responders risking their own lives. A drowning prevented.
Our staff, police, fire, public works, parks got out there and made close to about 200 water rescues. The guys getting into 4 feet, 10 feet of water and getting people out, getting into shelters.
Sanibel and Captiva Islands now cut off from the mainland. Both islands were washed over by storm surge, trapping those who didn't leave. Some houses with their roofs ripped off, others obliterated, boats capsized and grounded. Coast Guard helicopters pulling people to safety. also sending rescue swimmers to check boats for stranded survivors.
Even their eyes looking up and giving you a handshake or a pat in the back as you're getting brought back into the helicopter and bringing them back down on deck. It's pretty unforgettable.
Punta Gorda got lashed by Ian's fierce 155-mile-per-hour winds, but fortunately, there was no storm surge.
Hi, sweetie, it's Mommy. I'm in Punta Gorda. Daddy's alive. I'm alive.
Residents like Renee Smith reaching out to loved ones after a harrowing night. Her husband, Christopher, recently paralyzed from the chest down when his cancer spread to his spine.
All I could do was put a tarp over his hospital bed and zip tie it and put a life preserver on his neck because I didn't want him to drown in his hospital bed in my living room. After 30 years, I still love him. I'm not going to let him drown in the living room. I mean, who does that? You know, I couldn't move his bed. I couldn't move his bed to where I was hiding.
Their 121-year-old house, just 2 blocks from the water, rocked as the hurricane roared. What was it like for you?
So it was very scary in that there wasn't a goddamn thing I could do but just sit here and look out the window.
Renee, who hid under a table surrounded by pillows, tells me she felt guilty. She couldn't do more for her husband.
I felt helpless, and I didn't think that these would hold, you know.
All right, well.
And I know that you felt like you were in a body bag here, but it helped you.
Shaken, but relieved to be together.
All right, Carrie Sanders reporting tonight for us. We appreciate it. Carrie there was, of course, in Lee County, where Sanibel is located. And as Carrie reported, Sanibel has cut off. I want to bring in our next guest, who's the president of the Chamber of Commerce in Sanibel there. John Lai is his name. And, John, I understand tonight you're in Fort Lauderdale. You evacuated Sanibel. From what my producers have told me, the last time you had contact with anyone in Sanibel was around noon yesterday. What news are you hearing so far off the island? I know you've seen the pictures, and they're devastating.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's accurate. We actually have, we're in contact with a lot of people who opted to stay on island. We're able to talk to them right around noon yesterday. And shortly after that, we lost touch with them. We received a couple texts later in the day of storm surge coming in. But have not heard anything since then. Now, do know that the city of Sanibel and our county, Lee County, has sent out some boats today and fire rescue to do search and rescue on the island. They've pulled about 40 people off the island so far onto the mainland, gotten a lot of them medical help where they needed it, and it was roughly between 250 and 300 people. That number is obviously very fluid that we know of that are on the island. So where our primary priority right now is health and human safety and getting those people off island and the medical help that they may need.
John, what was your understanding? Because people who don't know Sanibel Island, it has some of the most beautiful beaches of Florida, but it is an island. It sticks out right there in the Gulf of Mexico. People that did not evacuate, looking at the pictures today, what was their thinking? Do you know?
Yeah, a couple different things, and it's run through my mind, obviously, over the last 48 hours of what made us leave, what would have made us stay. And to be honest, when you looked at this thing on Friday, it was going to hit the Panhandle, right, as a Category 3 or 4. But when it was predicted on, a couple days ago, we were looking at a 2 going into Tampa, and when the mandatory evacuations came out on Monday, it was tenuous because we were trying to get our homes ready because I think the storm had shifted, and we weren't all necessarily prepared for what was coming. It did what we know as a windshield wiper effect, where it was originally scheduled to come to the west coast of Florida. Then it was predicted to hit the Panhandle, then back to the west coast of Florida. And then with every hour or every update, we saw it tick east. And every time that it ticked east, it was headed right for us. And so I can't blame anyone. Their livelihoods are on that island. We have just under 500 members in the Chamber of Commerce out there between Sanibel and Captiva. And a lot of people have grown up on that island, live on that island, and believed that their homes were built for Category 2, and that was not going to be an issue. Storm surge was a warning, but if you lived through Charlie, they felt confident that this was not going to be as strong.
John, do you work with the Chamber of Commerce? You're the president there. Besides beachfront realty, the only other game in town in Sanibel is tourism. Do you have any idea how long it will take for Sanibel to reopen, for things to be rebuilt? I mean, has that even crossed your mind? I know people are still trying to be rescued.
Yeah, no, it sure has. I was, prior to doing Chamber of Commerce work, I was the director of several resorts on the island, and we lived through Charlie. And after Charlie, we saw a year and a half on some of our resorts. Some of them are 2 years, and this is going to be considerably longer than that. I don't know how we start without a bridge. You mentioned earlier that the bridge had been washed out in various points. There are 5 breaches within that bridge where pieces are missing, and you can see that there. We have a spoil island that's completely gone that the bridge used to land on. And so the entire bridge needs to be rebuilt geographically different than it was before, which means that we're going to be relying on ferries to take over equipment. We're going to, the re-entry process for residents and business owners is going to be, instead of weeks, it could be months. And that alone is a challenge right out of the gate, because we've got to get insurance adjusters out there. We've got to get, and then we've got to get construction crews. And as you all know, we've been going through supply chain issues over the past year. And so you just compound those things, and you've layered one problem on top of another. And so we know that this hill is steep. I know that this community is resilient and is ready to do this.
John Lai, the president of the Chamber of Commerce of Sanibel Island there. John, we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. We know it's a tough time. It's been over 24 hours since Hurricane Ian made landfall in Florida. It was downgraded to a tropical storm, but now, again, it is a Category 1 tonight. The danger from wind and flooding is far from over. I want to bring in meteorologist Bill Cairns, who's been working around the clock for this network and all the other platforms of NBC News. So, Bill, walk us through what's next for this storm, because it doesn't want to go anywhere.
And it just keeps overachieving. I mean, even, we still have a significant damage in western Cuba. That was the first landfall. Obviously, we've shown you what a Category 4 hurricane looks like after it goes through. It took 24 hours, but I think it's all settling in to everyone just how bad this is. I mean, one of the worst ever in our country's history. And now everyone in South Carolina and North Carolina wants to know, what are we going to look like when Ian's done with us? So let's get into that. So yes, it is a hurricane again. It does not have the same structure. It doesn't look anything like when this was over Cuba and when this hit Southwest Florida. This was not going to be that. This is not going to be a major hurricane at landfall. But we are going to take it northwards towards land again, and it has a large wind field. This is going to knock down a lot of trees and knock out power to millions. That's without a doubt, just because of how large the wind field is. So here we are Friday at 2 p.m. with landfall. What's interesting about this storm, the way it's structured now, is all the heavy wind and the rain is going to be before landfall. After it, hardly anything. So you're going to wake up to conditions, don't plan on doing anything in the Carolinas from, Savannah in Georgia there, Hilton Head, all the way up to Desto Beach, Charleston, Georgetown, Myrtle Beach, North Myrtle Beach into the Wilmington area. The winds will be howling when you wake up, and it'll be pouring rain. So don't plan on anything in the morning. It's going to be hunker down time. After it crosses, it'll actually be improving dramatically. The winds will die off quickly as the storm races inland. In the afternoon, we'll probably get a good idea of what happened, how bad the damage is. If you are told to evacuate, listen to your emergency managers. We're expecting winds at 80 miles per hour now. Yesterday at this time we were saying 65. So 15 miles per hour doesn't sound like much, but that's the difference between some trees being able to manage and some trees coming down. And all of our computer models, this is noon tomorrow, so we could see an even earlier landfall. Why did I pause it then? That's high tide in Charleston. Do we really need to compound this thing? And so if we're going to get that storm surge on top of that high tide, which is going to add about 2 feet to it, all of a sudden the water levels get to be a concern for that region. So we do have hurricane warnings, and for our friends up here south of Wilmington, those hurricane warnings were extended into North Carolina now because we've shifted a little bit more closer to you. So in the Wilmington, Myrtle Beach area, pay close attention tonight and tomorrow morning to that forecast. And then the storm surge, I mentioned it could come in with the high tide around noon tomorrow. Charleston, your record is Hugo. I mean, that was a major hurricane that went in. That was 12 feet. There's nothing like that. But Hurricane Matthew did bring you 7-foot storm surge. And if we get that 4 to 7 feet with the 2 feet on top of it, all of a sudden we're approaching Matthew level. So in the back of your mind, you know what damage occurred from Matthew. And it was pretty significant here. We lost a couple piers. There was some homes damage from Myrtle Beach areas down to Charleston. So that's a worst case scenario. Hopefully it won't be that bad, but that's the possibility with it. And then finally, of course, we're going to get a lot of rain out of this too. We could see easily 4 to 8 inches of rain in the Carolinas, even into Virginia, locally up to a foot. So yeah, we are going to get some significant damage and power outages. And it won't be the devastation that we've seen in Southwest Florida, but it's still, if a tree falls on your house, I think you'll call that storm pretty bad, and we're going to have plenty of that.
All right, Bill Cairns for us tonight. Bill, we do appreciate all of that. You may remember last night some of the first devastating images we got in were from Naples, Florida, an area that suffered major damage from big storm surge and winds that ripped through the city. Tonight, Sam Brock is there.
A day after disaster in Naples, and first responders racing to help the city recover, heartbreak.
What are you sort of processing as you look at that?
It's a lot to take in.
The 7+ feet of storm surge, doubling the previous record.
All the clients' files, what they've gotten done, they're all wet.
The storm hitting as Barana Laquaniti was just days away from opening up a clothing store, which she poured her life savings into.
The whole town is rooting for us, and then see it go down really hurts.
Naples city manager estimating $200 million in private property damage, what he called conservative, as Naples Fire Department full of grit. After they found their truck surrounded by all that water, firefighters got creative to connect with those in trouble.
They did their best. They went out on paddle boards. They had a paddleboard rescue, and they also went out on a little skiff.
The small city in Southwest Florida did suffer another loss in the 100-mile-an-hour winds. This iconic fishing pier broken by the winds and water.
For those of us who have lived here for a long, long time, it's the heart of Naples.
But there is no doubt the battering won't keep Naples down for long, as its residents look to regroup despite the shock and pain of the last 24 hours.
We're not giving up. This is our dream, and we're going to fight, and we're going to do everything all over again.
Sam Brock joins us now live from Naples tonight. Sam, we see that iconic pier, or at least I think pieces of it be there behind you. It's one of those spots that so many visit when they see Naples and they remember it. Tell us more about what's happened there and what can be done to fix it.
You know, it's been really interesting, Tom. I've been here for a couple of hours now, and I'll tell you, there are throngs of people after dusk on the beach. You can't really see them from this camera angle, but hundreds of them underneath that pier. And the mayor told me that she got calls when that viral video went around about whether or not it was still standing. People were crying, Tom, worried that wasn't the case. The last time we saw damage like this, 1960, Hurricane Donna took off the back half of the pier. It was 1,000 feet, then chipped off to 500. That is exactly what happened here again, but they said they're going to rebuild it, bring in the engineers, start the process over again.
And Sam, you know, Naples is one of those Florida cities in transition, historically a retiree and vacation spot, which has transformed in the last decade into a growing Florida city, as you know. How did all that new construction hold up?
That's a great question. And on the beachfront where I am right now, there are these multi-million-dollar properties. And I got to tell you, eyeballing it right now, not many of them are damaged. But we mentioned earlier the $200 million. That's just for the exterior of homes and businesses in this county. So that is to say that when people start looking inside the homes, you're looking at maybe $400 or $500 million worth of damage. Clearly, homes were damaged. But the new shiny ones that you see all along the beachfront right now look okay to me.
All right, Sam Brock for us tonight. Sam, we do appreciate it. Despite not facing the worst of the parts of central Florida saw record-breaking rain and fast-rising floodwaters. Our Blaine Alexander is in Orlando with first responders who endured floods to pull off some incredible rescues.
In Orlando, even a weakened Ian dealt a mighty blow. The emergency calls started before dawn, with fast-rising floodwaters forcing hundreds of evacuations.
Unfortunately, we are seeing the worst of what we expected with Hurricane Ian impact to our county.
At this senior living facility, fire and rescue crews spent hours pulling residents to safety one by one. A desperate race against time as water continued to rise.
We'd go to the rooms and we would put them in the wheelchairs, or we'd have to take a stretcher back to the rooms.
All this was happening while water was still coming in.
Yeah, it was still coming in.
We were there when this ambulance arrived to bring the final person to safety more than 9 hours after the rescue began.
I've been with the county for 24 years, so I've been through multiple hurricanes. And I would say this is, for me, it was the worst year with the numerous spots where we had some water rescues going on.
While Ian's winds were fierce, some gusts here hitting nearly 70 miles per hour. In central Florida, it's the rain that was the real threat, falling at record levels. Much of Orange County saw at least a foot of rain, and in some areas, more than 16 inches. It's the county's largest rainfall ever in a 24-hour period, more than double what's typically seen in all of September. Water spilled onto the roads, shutting down parts of the busy Florida Turnpike and leaving cars waterlogged. It even turned one reporter into a rescue worker. Tony Atkins with NBC's Orlando affiliate carried one woman to safety on his back. She says she was driving to her job as a nurse when her car was swept away.
All right, Blaine Alexander joins us now, spending so much time with those first responders who worked through the night. Blaine, a lot of our viewers across the country know Orlando, of course, because of all the attractions there. Do we have any idea how they fared through the storm?
Well, we do know that some of the biggest names, we're talking Disney, Universal Studios, all of them were closed down during this storm. Today was the second straight day that they shut down. And Disney says that they are going to reopen at least partially tomorrow, but some are waiting until Saturday, waiting until it all clears out. The good news for people who are trying to come to those attractions, though, they are working with customers to make sure they can still use those tickets, Tom.
All right, Blaine Alexander from Orlando tonight for us live here on Top Story. Blaine, we appreciate it. We want to turn now to a special guest. Fort Myers was one of the hardest hit areas. I want to bring in now the Fort Myers Fire Chief, Tracy McMillan, who has been working around the clock with his men and women and has just experienced something he likely has never seen in his life. Tracy, talk to me about last night into this morning, and as the sun came up, what you thought about what you were looking at right in front of you.
Yeah, last night was a totally different view. Once the winds passed us and we were able to get back out and start rendering, aid and care to our folks, we didn't see everything. So this time when we went out this morning at daylight, it was a totally different view. And I tell you, it's quite impactful. It was, man, I tell you, I really don't have a lot of words to say, especially, someone who's been in this city for, 26 years, and to actually see our city devastated like this, it was pretty tough, pretty hard.
Tracy, what's been the most difficult rescue your teams have told you about so far, or that you've witnessed up close?
The most difficult ones was one of the ones they did last night. It actually happened at one of our news stations, and there were 100 people that were stranded on the second floor. They were okay, but they were stranded on the second floor with water that actually had completely engulfed the first floor. So that was pretty challenging because there's just so many people.
I hate to ask you this, and I know it's still early, but how bad is it when it comes to people who did not survive this storm? Are you hearing anything from your teams on the field?
So for the city of Fort Myers, the area in which we actually serve, we're actually coming out really well. We haven't had any fatalities, a few minor injuries with people, doing recovery and cleaning up their yards. So far, so good when it comes to that type of a prognosis of someone who has, had a mortal or fatal fatalities. None of that so far. So we're extremely excited about that. Everything else we can rebuild, but we can't rebuild or, get another life.
That is great news. I'm sure it's pretty dark there in Fort Myers with no power in some areas. What are your teams up against, and what's the toughest challenge right now?
As you said, having the power and some of the infrastructure challenges. Our public works and our park and recs went out today and actually clear the roads, so that's great for us. So now it's just kind of the unknown. There's just so many different things that have actually changed as far as landscape and topography. So just trying to make sure as we go out in these dark times that we're able to navigate in streets that we may or once that we're really used to. Now they may have a different feel to it. And so we're just really making sure that there's no trees that may actually fall late or actually cause any other type of challenges that way.
Finally, what do you need tonight? What can people around the country do? What can the White House do? What can Governor DeSantis do for Fort Myers?
From what I can tell, what the White House is doing, Governor DeSantis is doing, has been great. It's been phenomenal. It's actually really refreshing to see, from a federal level and from a state level and even a local level, how everyone's kind of coming together and getting things done, and how everyone's actually caring about the mission and what we have to get accomplished. And that is really, really refreshing. But continue with the resources, continue with the, kind of encouragement.
Okay, we thank you for your time there, Tracy McMillan. Still ahead tonight, carving into Ukraine, Putin's latest push to take over even more land and the growing international backlash. Here at home, the new video of a deadly shootout in Philadelphia and an urgent manhunt now underway. And damage control in the White House, the puzzling moment from President Biden calling out for a congresswoman who has been dead for months. How his administration is explaining the gaffe. Top story, just getting started on this Thursday night. We're back now with the fallout after a strange moment for President Biden, who called out for a congresswoman who had tragically died earlier this year in a car accident. That moment has some critics again questioning the president's mental fitness. Our Josh Letterman has this report.
Joe Biden. To President Biden's critics, it was the latest reason to question his state of mind. The president appearing to look in the audience for a congresswoman who died nearly 2 months ago and to call out to her.
And I want to thank all of you here for including bipartisan elected officials like Representative Governor, Senator Braun, Senator Booker, Representative Jackie. Are you here? Where's Jackie? I didn't think she was going to be here.
Congresswoman Jackie Walorski died in a car crash on August 3rd, along with 2 staffers, while traveling in her district. She had worked on hunger issues that were the focus of the White House event. But the moment quickly went viral. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre forced to explain.
What happened in the hunger event today? The president appeared to look around the room for an audience member, a member of Congress who passed away last month.
The president was naming the congressional champions on this issue and was acknowledging her incredible work. He had already planned to welcome the congresswoman's family to the White House on Friday. There will be a bill signing in her honor this coming Friday. So, of course, she was on his mind. She was of top of mind for the president.
Top of mind, but alive and at the White House? That response only creating more questions, like why the White House wouldn't acknowledge what seemed obvious to most, that the president had simply slipped up.
But I think the confusing part is why, if she and the family is top of mind, does the president think that she's living and in the room?
I don't find that confusing.
These moments of confusion are happening with the recent.
Go ahead.
For years, Biden's opponents have questioned whether he still has the mental acuity to be president. At 79, Biden is the oldest president in U.S. history.
This guy doesn't have a clue. He doesn't know where the hell he is.
And Biden's occasional verbal missteps have given his critics plenty of fodder, like when he seemed to announce he has cancer.
That's why I and so damn many other people I grew up have cancer, and why for the longest time, Delaware had the highest cancer rate in the nation.
The White House quickly clarified he was referring to skin cancer that was removed before he became president. As the 2024 election gets closer, Biden's aides vigorously defend his mental and physical health, even when Republicans made hay over this presidential fall in July.
First of all, I'm glad to have a president who can ride a bicycle.
Health
the president of the United States
including
is
text
as
messages
vigorous a
from your
colleague
private
or
phone.
boss as I have ever had the pleasure
this.
of working with.
Josh Letterman joins us now from Washington. Josh, is there any reason why the press secretary wouldn't just admit the president was confused or simply made a mistake? It felt like we've seen this movie before, and Joe Biden campaigned on being a president who would return dignity and, in his words, ethics to the White House.
Well, the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was asked that very question today, Tom, and she said, look, she knows people don't like the answer they've provided, but it is not going to change. She says the White House view on this is that President Biden simply had the Congresswoman top of mind. But look, the White House clearly knows that Republicans want to pounce on this issue ahead of the midterms and then the 2024 election to make President Biden look questionable about his efficacy for office. They do not want to do anything or concede anything that might play into that argument, Tom.
And then finally, Josh, the president is obviously dealing with the response to Hurricane Ian, but has he himself been asked about this yet?
President Biden has not been asked about this, but the White House says he does plan to meet with members of Jackie Walorski's family this week, Tom.
Josh Letterman tonight for Top Story. Josh, we appreciate it. Now we move on to the war in Ukraine. Russia now set to formally announce the annexation of 4 regions of Ukraine following a referendum that both the international community and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky have called a sham. Putin also recently mobilizing more troops after battlefield setbacks. NBC senior national correspondent Jay Gray has more.
A major escalation in the fighting tonight in Ukraine. On the eve of President Vladimir Putin's formal announcement, Russia will annex 4 regions of the country he invaded. It comes after referendums in those areas, primarily controlled by Russia, an election Ukraine and Western allies call a sham. Germany's foreign minister saying many were forced to vote under pressure from armed Russian soldiers.
I want to underscore that the so-called referenda in the occupied regions were conducted during active armed conflict in areas under Russian occupation and outside Ukraine's legal and constitutional framework. They cannot be called a genuine expression of the popular will.
The Kremlin pushing forward with what U.S. officials call a land grab, framed by a highly successful counteroffensive from Ukraine forces in recent weeks. Moscow's Red Square prepping for the signing ceremony where Putin will speak Friday. Banners reading Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, Russia. Kherson and Zaporizhia, occupied regions in the south, Luhansk and Donetsk to the east, making up about 15% of Ukraine. Right now, according to the Institute for the Study of War, Ukrainian troops are on the cusp of surrounding a key city in Donetsk, a clear indication annexation won't be the end of the fighting. Ukraine's foreign ministry dismissing the referendum, saying in a written statement, forcing people in these territories to fill out some papers at the barrel of a gun is yet another Russian crime in the course of its aggression against Ukraine, and stressing the areas remain Ukraine's sovereign territory.
Well, it's one thing to say that they're annexed, and it's something else again to make it happen. Don't forget that the Ukrainians are counterattacking all along the front.
The results from the staged referendum were announced this week, just after Putin's order calling up 300,000 reservists to join the fight, triggering a mass exodus across the country, thousands of Russians trying to escape the draft.
Мне 57 лет, и я хочу, чтобы все знали, что я против войны. Я не поддерживаю путинский режим, не поддерживаю то, что творится в Украине, не поддерживаю братоубийственную войну.
Miles of traffic seen at border crossings with Georgia and Finland, the latter announcing today it will now ban Russian tourists from entering.
I don't recollect protest as widespread in recent memory as it has been in Russia.
Those protests, as NATO investigates what it's labeled irresponsible acts of sabotage to the leaking Nord Stream 1 and 2, the pipelines that carry natural gas from Russia into Europe. Tonight here in Kyiv, President Volodymyr Zelensky not backing down, in fact saying that Russia will not get a new territory out of Ukraine. He has called for an emergency meeting of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council and has repeatedly said there will be a harsh response to what he calls illegal referendums. Tom?
Jay Gray for us tonight from Ukraine. When we come back, Ginny Thomas testifying before Congress. Why the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas was called before the January 6th committee. Stay with us. All right, we are back now with Top Stories newsfeed. We begin with Ginny Thomas, interviewed by the January 6th committee for more than 3 hours today. Thomas, the wife of conservative Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, appearing voluntarily before the committee. She's come under scrutiny for texts sent to former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows during the riot, telling former President Trump not to concede the election. Thomas declined to speak to reporters as she left that deposition. Police in Philadelphia releasing new video of a deadly shootout targeting a high school football team. Surveillance video shows 5 suspects jumping out of an SUV. You see them right there, unloading a barrage of bullets in the middle of the street. 4 members of the Roxborough High School football team injured as they were leaving a scrimmage. One 14-year-old student killed. Police now offering a $40,000 reward for any information. All right, we want to continue our coverage now of Hurricane Ian and its devastating effects on Florida communities like Marco Island, an area that saw storm surge, torrential rain, and high winds. turn streets into rivers, and knock out power for thousands of customers. For more on the town's damage and what comes next for the almost 18,000 people who call it home, I want to bring in Marco Island City Manager Mike McNeese. Mike, thanks for joining Top Story tonight. I know Marco Island very well, spent a lot of summers there growing up in Miami and heading to those wonderful beaches. What is left of Marco Island tonight?
Well, relative to what we've seen farther up the Florida's west coast, Marco Island fared very well in Ian. We were spared the highest of the winds on the northeast quarter of the storm, and really were never much higher than tropical storm force winds, although for a little over 24 hours. We did have very, very significant storm surge. We had a significant amount of flooding in some of our residential areas. So we're dealing with that. But at this point in time, all of our roads are passable. The real major issue we still have is that we don't have power, and we're expecting to start see progress in that within the next 12 to 24 hours. And so, yes, we have residential flooding, well under 25%, I would say, of our homes, and probably well south of that. So we don't have a full assessment yet, but compared to what we've seen on up the coast, Marco Island fared very well, particularly given the circumstances. I mean, for example, our water system is completely intact. We're not under any kind of boil water notice. Our water and wastewater systems are fully functional. And as soon as we get power back, we'll be well on our way.
Yeah, it is great what fortunately has happened to your island. As far as structural damage goes, those winds were so strong. Did the hotels, the condos, a lot of buildings there on the beach, those hold up okay?
Wind was not an issue for us as much. We do have one building that's near the beach or near the waterfront where there has been some erosion along the foundation that will certainly merit some further investigation. But we're not aware yet of any significant structural issues that were caused by the surge.
Marco Island City Manager Mike McNeese, we thank you for your time tonight. Thank you so much for joining us here on Top Story. All right, we turn now to Top Story's Global Watch and violent protesters trying to break into the Iranian Embassy in Norway. New video shows demonstrators outside the embassy in Oslo kicking and standing on cars. Officials say they detained 90 people. It comes after a woman died in the custody of the Iranian morality police, her death drawing international outcry and sparking deadly days-long protests, which we've covered here on Top Story. Now to the search for survivors in northern Brazil after a deadly bridge collapse. New video shows the aftermath, parts of the overpass cracked off and submerged. Cars and trucks left stranded in the Amazon River. Authorities say at least 3 people are dead, with as many as 15 still missing. Witnesses say they saw a crack in the bridge before it collapsed. Staying overseas and turmoil in Great Britain tonight. The value of the pound plummeting, forcing the Bank of England to take emergency action. This comes after the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, proposed an almost $50 billion tax cut plan. I want to bring in NBC News senior international correspondent Keir Simmons, who joins Top Story tonight from London. So, Keir, explain to us the Prime Minister's thinking as it's come under criticism there, but also here in the U.S. The Prime Minister hopes it encourages investment from bigger companies.
It has been criticized, Tom. She does have some thinking. Let's just break this down into what's happening in the world and what's happening in the UK. So in the world, you know that fuel prices have been rising because of the war in Ukraine. That's been fueling inflation. And then in other countries, in many countries that borrow in dollars, they have had a problem because it's going to get more expensive to pay back those dollars because of the interest rate rises there. And it's going to get more costly just paying off the interest. So around the world, countries are facing those kind of economic headwinds. Now, what the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss here in Britain said is, OK, I'm going to introduce a massive tax cut. That is going to help the economy and help people survive through these tough times. Problem is, it wasn't properly funded and the homework wasn't set out when the tax cut was introduced. So the financial markets have panicked. And also, a tax cut is likely to fuel inflation, which means higher interest rates. So the British government is in an economic crisis right now, and this new government is only a few weeks in, Tom.
So part of Truss's plan, at least what she is saying, it won't fix things overnight, but she says she's playing the long game here. Will she have enough time? What is the level of patience right now with the people of the UK?
It's a great question. And you know, Tom, that in politics, most folks watching, not you or I, but most folks keep one eye on politics while they go about their daily lives. And then something happens that really intervenes in their daily lives, risks their family's finances, and they really pay attention, and they don't like it. And that's what's happening right now. These moves by the British government, while it appeared to be trying to introduce tax cuts, particularly for the wealthy and help the economy, in fact, many British people are looking at much higher interest rates, much bigger mortgage payments, maybe even mortgage payments that they aren't going to be able to afford. So this is having seismic political repercussions. Does the British Prime Minister have time till the next election? She has 2 years, but her credibility, my goodness, it's really being rocked by this.
And Keir, finally, you know, the opposition party there, the Labour Party, is calling this a kamikaze budget. Do they have any power to fight her?
Yeah. Their polling numbers now, Tom, they are 33% ahead in the polls. Now, as I mentioned, there is 2 years yet, we think, to the general election, unless there's a complete political catastrophe and this government falls. But it could be 2 years away. There's nothing the opposition can do, the Labour Party, right now, but they are looking very competent compared with this British Conservative government. They say here in politics, Tom, that it isn't oppositions that win elections, it is governments that lose elections. And right now, if you look at political history, that looks like what this current Conservative government is doing.
And the world will be watching to see what happens there with the economy there in the UK. Keir Simmons for us tonight. Keir, we appreciate it. We head back to Florida. We'll have the latest on Ian, now re-strengthening to a hurricane, leaving a trail of destruction in its path. Welcome back. We want to head back now to Orlando, Florida, facing widespread flooding, downed trees, and wind damage from Ian. The storm passing south of the city overnight and leaving behind a trail of destruction. NBC's Jesse Kirsch was with us all night last night as Ian was approaching Orlando. He joins us now. Jesse, it looks like you're in the middle of a swamp, but tell our viewers exactly where you are.
Yeah, Tom, this is a neighborhood behind me. Officials say that they've made approximately 30 rescues from here. The biggest concern from Ian in this part of the state was heavy rainfall. Officials say we only saw about half as much rain as was expected, but you can see the damage was still done. I want to push in real quickly off to the distance. You see that basketball hoop. We know that a basketball rim should be about 10 feet off the ground, and you can see that at least part of that hoop is submerged right now in water. This community has a long road of cleanup ahead of it. And one of the concerns in these kinds of waters are alligators, Tom. So this is not the time to be going in there to see what damage was done. The water coming down and the wind gusts have largely subsided here in Orlando, but there is still the potential for some strong winds. So some of the cleanup efforts, some of the infrastructure repair might be interrupted by those wind gusts as it keeps pushing through this area, with many still without power, though it has cooled off, which should make tonight easier to deal with than if it was hot out without air conditioning, Tom.
Jesse, earlier in the broadcast, we heard from Blaine, who's also there in Orlando, telling us about how hard Orlando had gotten hit, even though the storm wasn't as powerful as when it made landfall on the west coast of Florida. But I have to ask you something. That's a lot of water behind you. Is it receding at all?
Yeah, at this point, Tom, it is not. And I just mentioned we're largely past the heavy rain here, it seems. It has been mostly dry throughout the afternoon. And as I look down at the water level here, we have that rock we've been keeping an eye on since this afternoon for about 3 hours or so now. And it has not really receded beyond that level. So even though it is kind of drying out overhead right now, we are still dealing with water that is sitting put for the moment, Tom.
Yeah, not a good sign there. Okay, Jesse Kirsch for us tonight. Jesse, we do appreciate it. And we thank you for watching Top Story tonight. I'm Tom Llamas in New York. Stay right there. More news on the way.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.